I was asked not too long ago, why do we celebrate the ascension of the Lord? So we celebrate Easter, we celebrate the resurrection. How does this fit in? Well, we celebrate the ascension because, in a certain sense, we're no different from the early church who gathered around this story that was so important to them. And from the very beginning, what they heard in this passage of the Gospel from Mark was what they felt they needed. The news that they were going to receive power. And perhaps even more importantly, we celebrate this day to be reminded that we have no power of our own and never have. But what we have is given to us by God as His disciples to preach the word in all places and in all times. We know from the Acts of the Apostles, the disciples were a fragile little community. They were anxious, they were bewildered, watching their Lord leave them. But they weren't distraught, they weren't sad. And when it's all over, they worshiped with joy. They had an advantage in a certain sense. They knew that they had been given the power to do what the Lord wanted them to do. I think we live in an era which is sort of diluted by the notion that everything is up to us. Whenever people, however, gather around a baptismal font, they publicly proclaim that they rely on a power beyond themselves, that they believe in God whose love and strength sustains them in all things. Ascension Day, I think, is a day to remember in a very particular way the Spirit, which we will celebrate next week on the Feast of Pentecost. That the Spirit is at work in the church. The Spirit is at work in the family and in the world. And that makes all manner of things which seem impossible to us possible. Things a good deal more mystifying than Jesus rising into the air. Things like a woman who knew she couldn't face it when her husband became critically ill and died shortly afterwards. A woman who woke up each morning wanting to fall apart, wanting to go back to a better time. But she didn't. She survived and met what came her way each day. And not only that, when she looks back, she knows she didn't do it alone, because facing her husband's death was not something that she could face alone. By the power of the Spirit of God, God's presence in her and in those who supported her, the man who had left her had given her, in a certain sense, a gift, the reality of God working in her life and in her family. We give thanks today for the power of God, in a very special way, the power of the Spirit, which makes things which seem impossible possible.